Hello, my name is Colby Mazzarella. Welcome to Life Matters, a BNN show sponsored by Massachusetts Citizens for Life. MCFL is a nonprofit organization that has defended life for 31 years. I'd like to read our mission statement. Can we have that on the screen? In recognition of the fact that each human life is a continuum from conception to natural death, the mission of Massachusetts Citizens for Life is to promote the respect for human life and to defend the right to life of all human beings, born and unborn. We will influence public policy at the local, state, and national level through comprehensive educational, legislative, political, and charitable activities. Today's show is part of our educational work, and today's guest is Christopher Garrison, who's the New England Director of Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Chris, welcome to Life Matters.
Thank you very much, Colby.
You're welcome. Now, can you explain to us a little bit about CCHR, what that is?
Yes, CCHR stands for Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And it was established in 1969 by the Church of Scientology and a psychiatrist named Dr. Thomas Zaz for the purpose of investigating and exposing psychiatric abuses of human rights, and also to generally clean up human rights abuses in the whole field of mental health.
Okay, so CCHR has been investigating psychiatric abuse, and I understand that you found a connection between that and abortion and eugenics. But first, I'd like you to define psychology and psychiatry. That can be confusing.
All right. Well, psychology actually originally meant the study of the soul. Psyche is soul, ology means study of. So originally it meant study of the soul, but in 1879, the meaning of the word began to change with a guy named Wilhelm Wundt, a psychologist in Leipzig, Germany, opened up a lab to study human behavior, and he assigned his students to just study the physical aspects of man and to ignore the mind and mental phenomena.
So it used to be a spiritual study, psychology, and religious, wasn't it, in history?
Yes, it definitely was. It was a study of the spirit and the abilities of the spirit and so forth. It really meant study of the spirits, psychology. But it has become very materialistic. It views man in a most materialistic way, even to the point of we have behaviorism, developing, where the idea is that environmental stimuli are the sole cause of what causes people to do things.
So you have an exhibit that's explaining this more?
Yes, we have an incredible exhibit. It's on display tomorrow. That's Friday, August 11th, and Saturday, August 12th. From 10 in the morning till 10 in the evening, and this is on display at the old John Hancock Hall, which is at the corner of Stewart and Berkeley Streets. And we are in something called the Dorothy Quincy Suite, which is about 4,500 square foot area for our display. And within the display are 8 large flat screen TVs, and there's 14 videos that are shown.
Yeah, we have a little bit of that to show today, and we'll show that in a minute to introduce psychiatry, how it's become an abusive practice sometimes.
Yes, we have 2 clips from 2 of the videos out of the 14.
Okay, could we get the introduction to psychiatry video to be on the screen?
No one can deny that our world is in trouble. Today, our cities have become battlegrounds, often ruled by gang violence. Every 42 seconds, a violent crime is committed in the United States. Every third of a minute, someone is arrested for drug abuse. 8 million American children are prescribed drugs that cause violence and suicide. Images of murderous school children and acts of senseless violence fill the headlines. None of this just happened.
People aren't aware that in 1940, a prominent British psychiatrist, Colonel J.R. Rees, addressed the National Council on Mental Hygiene and set the agenda for psychiatry for the next 60 years. Since then, psychiatrists have been given authority in nearly every sector of our society, with tragic results.
We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. Public life, politics, and industry should all of them be within our sphere of influence. We have made a useful attack upon a number of professions. The two easiest of them, naturally, are the teaching profession and the church. The most difficult are law and medicine.
Rees's colleague, psychiatrist G. Brock Chisholm, co-founder of the World Federation for Mental Health, expanded upon psychiatry's plans.
The reinterpretation and eventually eradication of the concept of right and wrong are the objectives of all psychotherapy. To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas.
To implement their master plan, American psychiatrists promised the U.S. Congress that they could solve mankind's problems, but only if they were sufficiently bankrolled. Since then, U.S. government funding for psychiatric research alone has gone from $1 million to $1.4 billion a year, an increase of more than 139,000%. And with these funds, psychiatrists accelerated their strategic plan, turning an unsuspecting public into psychiatric victims. They create imaginary diseases that are literally voted into existence and published in their billing Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM.
DSM is basically an arbitrary classification of thoughts, moods, and behavior decided upon by a committee of psychiatrists, and it's created not by anything scientific. That is, it's not as if there's some study of tissue or some study of the body or some study of matter.
These invented diseases are then treated with barbaric practices and dangerous drugs that are so powerful they are classified with narcotics such as morphine, cocaine, and heroin. And even still, they are prescribed to children. The U.S. government-funded National Institutes of Health assembled a panel of prominent doctors and psychiatrists to explain to the public one of the diseases contained in the DSM, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD.
I would like any member of the panel to describe a typical ADHD in terms of symptomatology. Mark, would you like to? Since you see them in your practice.
I think the panel has been frank, and the difficulties here are immense in terms of these. It is hard. It's very hard to know how to answer this question. They cannot, even when. They are as if driven by a motive. There are some good clinical descriptions. And I think, I think the part of the problem is the profession keeps changing the diagnosis.
At this time, we do not have a diagnostic test for ADHD. Therefore, the validity of the disorder continues to be a problem.
Psychiatrists receive $21 billion a year, prescribing powerful psychotropic drugs to children for a disease that doesn't exist.
It's all a fraud. They spend millions upon millions creating this research.
So that clip was from your exhibit on psychiatry. And it did show how it's become very materialistic and the body's chemicals are the source of spiritual problems. But
that's that viewpoint.
That's what they're saying. Yeah. And now they had psychiatric leaders. Rees, one quote from that clip that I thought was interesting was, Colonel Rees said psychiatry should permeate and influence and attack religion, education, law, and medicine. How has that actually been happening since he said that?
Oh, well, you can just see it in our schools. I mean, when I was going to school, there were no psychologists in the schools. Kids were not drugged for made-up diseases. And now we have about, 15% of the boys in Massachusetts going to schools in Massachusetts are probably on psych drugs on a daily basis, and many of the girls are too. And you have, it's just the permeation in the education system is gigantic. the permeation in the other areas. For instance, the field of medicine, you now have, you actually have medical doctors now drugging kids for made-up diseases. It's completely made up. They don't do any medical testing, so it's even perverted. That whole area, which has, you know, ordinarily has some science behind it, it's just gone, it's been perverted into a very strange thing, drugging kids for made-up diseases.
Well, Colonel Reese on that video clip said he would permeate religion and attack religion too. How did that happen?
Well, I remember a friend of mine, you know, he told me, Richard Girard, you might even know this guy. He was studying to be a priest, and he remembered, you know, his school that he was at lost accreditation because it didn't have psychology courses. Mm-hmm. You know, it was a big argument. He didn't realize he even needed, he couldn't even see the relevance of it, but yet his school lost accreditation to train him as a priest because they didn't have psych courses, and that was years ago. But there's lots of examples, but you know, that's one of them right there.
Now, the other founder of a psychiatric group on the video was G. Brock Chisholm, and he said that the goal of psychology and psychiatry is to erase the concept of right and wrong and religious dogma. So we are going to explain the link with eugenics and abortion. Can you connect that with these quotes that we heard?
A little bit. You know, you just see a psychiatric point of view these days, which is permeating society in large part through the schools and even the churches a little bit. But there's this idea that man is just a materialistic item, just material. And you know, so you have a sort of a cheapening of man. You know, they're going to push that man does what he does because of chemicals in his brain, and it sort of dehumanizes the person. It makes the person seem like he doesn't have power of choice. He's not even a human being. There's no person there. There's no soul. There's no spirit making decisions.
So is it more like animal psychology?
Yes, and it cheapens a view of what a person is. So a person is more disposable, you know, because they're just matter. So you could dispose them with abortions. You could dispose them, you know, through the eugenics movement, this idea of trying to control hereditary traits by controlling who's born and who isn't, and who should be castrated and who should be sterilized, or should they even be allowed to stay alive, as we have in the Holocaust.
So we have a video clip, another clip from your exhibit, which we can show now, which is about the Holocaust.
January 1945. As World War II comes to a close, the full horror of Hitler's final solution is exposed. With grotesque killing factories, unparalleled in human history. Mass graves filled with corpses of men, women, and children, murdered by starvation, bullets, and poison gas. What could drive men to commit such atrocities against their fellow human beings?
The answer is the pseudoscience called eugenics, created and promoted by psychiatrists decades before the Nazis came to power.
The eugenics movement got started in 1883 with Francis Galton, and he felt that human beings should take evolution in their own hands, and that the most talented individuals, the most healthy individuals, the most attractive individuals should have more offspring. They felt that a medical solution might be the proper one. This is what led to the sterilization movement.
It resulted in sterilization of mentally ill people, sterilization of retarded people, sterilization of people we don't like politically and sociologically. So the problem is not with genetics. The problem is a pretend phony genetics used to justify inhumane social policies.
By the early part of the 20th century, eugenics had spread to almost 30 countries, from England to Brazil, Mexico, Sweden, Russia, and most notably, the United States, where forced sterilization was widely practiced.
Eugenics movement in Germany was somewhat different than the eugenics movement in the United States in that there were many more physicians and psychiatrists. Alfred Plutz was one of the pioneers in the German eugenics movement and how to control the population of those whom he considered inferior. In 1905, along with his brother-in-law, Ernst Rudin, he established the first organization for racial hygiene.
Alle Nationen haben sich mit einer außergewöhnlich großen Menge an minderwertigen, schwachen, kranken und Verkrüppelten abzugeben. Durch kluge Gesetze über Sterilisation würden wir auch in der Lage sein, den vernünftigsten Weg der Zeugung herbeizuführen.
Hitler was particularly impressed by American eugenicist Madison Grant. Grant's book, The Passing of the Great Race, was proclaimed by Hitler as his personal Bible. In his book Mein Kampf, Hitler further hailed eugenics as the science that would rebuild the German nation.
Seine Krankheit an seine Kinder weiterzugeben. Das Recht auf persönliche Freiheit wird durch seine Pflicht, die Rasse zu beschützen, verteidigt.
The German eugenicists welcomed the Nazi advent to power because the Nazi program could fund the very programs that they had in mind. The Nazis gave them political support, financial support, and conversely, the psychiatrists gave the Nazis a medical justification for their genocidal policies.
Something like 40% of German psychiatrists had joined the SS by 1933. They weren't forced into the SS, they just joined it naturally because the beliefs were very, very similar.
Rudin and his work led directly to the decision to move from sterilization to murder.
The plan was simple. Gain the public's agreement that feeble-minded undesirables should be killed. Then, extend the definition to include Jehovah's Witnesses, Jews, gypsies, homosexuals. All unworthy of life. Psychiatrists produced propaganda movies known as the Nazi killing films, shown in all 5,300 theaters throughout Germany.
Geisteskrankheit ist als ein Erbübel eine der größten Gefahren für die Volksgesundheit. Irrtum ist, dass sich solche Kranken glücklich fühlen und am Leben hängen. Sie haben überhaupt kein Daseinsbewusstsein. Wer von ihr befallen wird, dem ist die schwerste Last des Schicksals auferlegt. Ein Dasein ohne Leben.
It first started with passive violence, which is starvation. It then intensified to lethal injections, and finally it developed into systematic gassing and cremation.
Their headquarters were established in Berlin under the infamous codename T4.
T4 program was named after Tiergarten 4, which essentially resulted over a period of time in the murder of about 70,000 people who were deemed mentally retarded, emotionally distraught, or physically handicapped by the Germans. They were called life unworthy of living.
The killing piloted in psychiatric institutions across Germany, then moved into the concentration camps, with top German psychiatrists as the executioners. Paul Nietzsche, the T4 director, declared,
Das Töten in Konzentration.
All right, so that clip showed that Hitler used psychiatric principles, and you have some other documentation of that too?
Well, there's just tons of documentation about it. One thing I want to mention is a book called Psychiatrists, The Men Behind Hitler. And in here is a whole history as to...
Hold up the book for a
Oh,
while.
here we go.
Okay.
Psychiatrists, The Men Behind Hitler. And this can be purchased by going to a website called cchr.org. That stands for Citizens Commission on Human Rights. cchr.org. It's a very interesting website. But this book is one of the several publications that you can get there. And it goes into, you know, it documents very factually this, the movement of the psychiatrists providing the rationale for the Holocaust.
So Hitler used abortion, sterilization, and murder to purify the race. But how does that connect to what happens with eugenics here now in our time?
Well, it's been in our society quite a bit. In the United States, the eugenics movement was actually in the so-called modern industrialized world, which was really extremely barbaric. But in the modern industrialized world, earlier in the last century, in the early 1900s, In the United States, we used to castrate mental patients and castrate, and sterilize retarded people and mental patients. But of course, it developed into the full-blown. At first, in Germany, they started by starving people to death. And then they switched to gas. The psychiatrists developed the gas chambers.
But how about closer to now, where we have the abortion and eugenics came through Planned Parenthood to our own time?
Yes, actually, Margaret Sanger, she was a eugenicist. She believed in this. I wouldn't say she was like the people in Nazi Germany, but she herself considered herself a eugenicist.
So there's what's the difference between eugenics in our century and eugenics in our time and eugenics under Hitler?
Well, it's not, there was such an uproar after what happened in Nazi Germany. There was, of course, a huge backlash against it. But we have things going on. For instance, psychiatrists, they will drug pregnant mothers with, they'll drug pregnant mothers. They'll give electric shock is often done to pregnant women. So you have damage to the fetus going on, serious damage to the fetus. Or you have kids born going through withdrawals from antidepressants because the women have been put on these things.
Well, why did Margaret Sanger start Planned Parenthood? What did that have to do with eugenics?
Well, I don't know the full history of that, to tell you the truth, but I just feel that what we were saying before, the psychiatrists have pushed this very materialistic view of man, which kind of cheapens life. If someone holds this view that man is just chemicals, and there's no soul, there's no spiritual nature to man, it cheapens the whole view of man. And so you can have ideas like this. It makes man more disposable, even in terms of war, or the Holocaust, or abortions, or, it makes people more easy to dispose of without pangs of conscience when you view them as just materialistic items. And psychiatrists have been pushing this idea that man is just material. And the drug companies do too. They want you to think that it's just chemicals that make people behave the way they do.
I know that Margaret Sanger said she wanted more children from the fit and less from the unfit, and that was her eugenics talking. I guess there's a difference in whether it's done by force or in the name of freedom would be between Hitler's time and our time would be a difference.
Yeah, well, with psychiatry, this is one of the objectionable things about it. First, the diagnoses there's no medical testing for psychiatric diagnosis, and then the treatments often cause very severe physical harm and often psychological harm to people. But the other thing about it, it's coercive. So you have, involuntary commitment going on, where people are put into mental hospitals against their will. They may get emotional in an emergency room during a medical accident. And someone says, you're too hysterical, you need to go to a psych ward. And if they fight, they can be strapped down they can be thrown face down, put in 4-point restraints, on a gurney, on a rolling bed. Someone pull down their pants, put a hypodermic of drugs in their buttocks. They wake up in a seclusion room. So we have involuntary, commitment, but the involuntary coercive nature of it shows up too, for instance, say in the schools. You have maybe a school teacher who says, who's been trained in psychology, and she thinks because a little boy in her class is not paying attention that he has a brain disorder. He needs to be put on drugs. It's an unbelievable thing, really, but then it could lead to the mother being called in and being told, you should have your child checked to see if he has ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The mother takes the kid to a doctor. There's no medical checking. She may see the doctor for the first time for 15 minutes, and as a result of that visit, with no medical testing, the kid's put on drugs for 10 years.
So isn't there a blood test or a physical examination that would tell you if someone has ADHD?
There is none. There's none whatsoever. People have been looking for these things for 30 years. They've been looking for some physical evidence. There isn't any, and they won't find it, and they've been looking for 30 years.
Well, if someone wanted to find out more about the history of psychiatry and links to eugenics and how eugenics has used abortion, is there a website they could go to?
You could go to cchr.org, and we also have this incredible display at the Old John Hancock Center, the Dorothy Quincy Suite, Friday the 11th of August from 10 to 10, and also Saturday, the 12th of August from 10 to 10.
Well, thank you very much for being our guest today and explaining bringing those videos, and the exhibit also would be very educational if someone could go to that too.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Colby.
Yes. And thank you also for being on our show, for being our audience today. Please keep us in your prayers, And if you would like to learn more about life issues, contact Massachusetts Citizens for Life at masscitizensforlife.org. Thank you for watching, and see you next week on Life Matters.